This is WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM, community radio for East Central Illinois. Streaming live at www.weft.org. The views and opinions expressed here are those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent those of WFT, its board of directors, associates, its station manager, or Prairie Air Incorporated. The following program is pre-recorded and consists of two parts. The first part is a rebroadcast of a program first aired in 2011. The second part was recorded on September 21st, 2015. Welcome to Weekend Heartbeat. I'm Sean David, and this is a new lamp.
New lamp for old, new lamp for old. Remember how Aladdin headed out to get oil for his mother's old dented, tarnished lamp? And in the market he met a magician calling out these words. This strange man was offering to give him a brand new shiny lamp for his old one. That's what I want to offer you, if you'll have it. A new lamp of spiritual guidance. But maybe you already have such a lamp, which still burns brightly. Great! You are still welcome to join us simply to learn who we are. But maybe your lamp of divine guidance has gotten dented and tarnished like Aladdin's. Or perhaps you have no such lamp at all. To you, I offer a new lamp. Hi, my name is Marilyn. Welcome to A New Lamp, a program designed to make you acquainted with the Baha'i religious faith. I hope you will choose to spend the next few minutes with me. Thanks.
Well, I guess you think your actions are concealed and won't be told. They'll be broadcast from loudspeakers where you creep in the house of God. And the poor ones who expired underneath your boots and chains, I hope they make your jury when your judgment day begins. There'll be no place left to run to, no cave in which to hide. There'll be no rock, no hole that you can't escape to in the house of God. All the clothing that you pilfered, the furniture and gold, well, I hope it falls upon you where you crawl in the house of God. All the metal that you sharpened to beat these gentle ones, well, I hope it's pressed upon you when your judgment day begins. There'll be no There'll be no rock, no hole that you can't escape to in the house of God. Denied them when the sun was at its height. Maybe it will drown you where you howl in the house of God. And there's one thing that concerns me about the great love of these friends. They'll forgive you when your judgment day begins. I hope there's no place left to run to, no cave in which to hide, no rock, no hole that you can't escape to in the house of God.
So far, I have introduced you to those holy beings who founded the Baha'i religion. I am ready to tell you about form of worship, holy days, marriage and funerals, etc., but have decided that it is more urgent to tell you about the persecution of the faith. I have already told you about the slaughter of the believers during the heroic period of the newly developing faith. In this country, we may not like what someone else believes, but true persecution is not part of our experience. In the Muslim countries, it is still prevalent, and most notably in Iran, the cradle of the Baha'i faith. Does this mean we consider all Muslims our enemies? No way. For 168 years, the Baha'is in Iran have suffered and died just for being a Baha'i. There have been times when the persecution was less, but since the 1979 uprising of the Islamic Revolution Army, it has been constant. At the time of that revolution, hundreds of Baha'is were killed simply because they would not deny their faith in Baha'u'llah and become Muslims. The people of the world rose up against this treatment of minority people in Iran, and it was somewhat suppressed, but never eliminated. Baha'is are the largest minority group in Iran, with 300,000 members, and bear the largest brunt of the intolerance of that nation. The children are harassed not only by other children, but by the teachers also. College-age youth are not allowed a college education. All Baha'i holy places have been destroyed, graveyards torn up, homes burned. Even the educated have trouble finding work. At the moment of this writing, there are over 100 Baha'is imprisoned, many still waiting trial. Particularly, there are 5 men and 2 women referred to as the Yaran, or friends, in prison sentenced to 20 years. Because Baha'is were not allowed to meet together or to elect leaders for their national spiritual assembly, these 7 received permission to visit individual Baha'is. The government was aware for years that they had been doing so. During the revolution, 9 members of the National Spiritual Assembly of Iran had been killed, and when 9 new leaders had been elected, they too had been executed. So the 7 Yaran was the only leadership in the country. Baha'is are pacifists and non-political. We are to obey our government and not be dissenters, striving to serve all humankind. Among the 7 are psychologists, educators, and businessmen. Without cause, they were imprisoned and are starting their 4th year of confinement. The original charges were espionage, working against Islam, and other equally untrue charges. They were denied access to their lawyers, and the trial dates put off more than once. After much pressure applied from outside the country, the mock trials finally took place. The death sentences dropped. Now they languish with little hope of release. At first, they were all in Irvin prison in Tehran. The men were in a separate cell, and the two women together. They were then moved to a prison even worse than the infamous Irvin prison, in a different area of the country. The cell where the women were held was so crowded that everyone could not lie down to sleep at the same time. The cell contained many hardened female criminals. Strangely, these violent women gradually found true friends in these two Baha'is. Violence in the cell was reduced. This was not to the liking of the jailers that these two were having such a strong influence on their fellow prisoners instead of the other way around. The two were moved downstairs to an even worse situation. They were existing in filth, 400 women in one cell with only 4 restrooms. I understand they have now been returned to Irvin prison. Their physical condition is deteriorating, but they continue to be an inspiration to their fellow prisoners, as well as to the world at large. I am proud to say that our Illinois senators, Kirk and Durbin, have created, in bipartisan fashion, legislation regarding human rights conditions in Iran, particularly focusing on the Baha'i persecution. A program was held in Senator Kirk's office in Washington, D.C. on May 12th of this year regarding the situations of the Iranian Baha'is. To see it, go to Senator Mark Kirk's website and see the video of it. Thank you, Senators. I'm proud you both represent Illinois in our national government. The words of this next piece of music are Baha'u'llah's. The land of Ta refers to Tehran. If you have questions or comments, please contact me at anewlamp@yahoo.com.
Let nothing grieve thee, O land of Ta, for God hath chosen thee to be the source of the joy of all mankind. He shall, if it be his will, bless thy throne with one who will rule with justice, who will gather together the flock of God that the wolves have scattered. Such a ruler will, with joy and gladness, turn his face towards and extend his favor unto the people of Baha. Let nothing grieve thee, O land of Ta, for God hath chosen thee to be the source of the joy of all mankind. He shall, if it be his will, bless thy throne with one who will rule with justice, who will gather together the flock of God that the wolves have scattered. Such a ruler will, with joy and gladness, turn his face towards and extend his favor unto the people of Baha.
We entreat God to deliver the light of equity and the sun of justice from the thick clouds of waywardness, and cause them to shine forth upon men. No light can compare with the light of justice. The establishment of order in the world and the tranquility of the nations depend upon it. Baha'u'llah. Thanks so much for being with me this morning. I hope you have found a blessing during these few minutes. If you want to learn more about the Baha'i religion, you can go online to www.bahai.us. To contact me, my email address is anewlamp@yahoo.com. Thanks, and have a great day. Good afternoon. Our guests today are husband and wife team, Karen Lavazza and Bob Quinlan. Welcome to you both.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn.
Hi, guys.
Hey, Sean.
Hi, Sean.
You are our first Baha'is from Muhammad to be on our program. And today we'll be thinking about what it means to live a Baha'i-based life. But first, let's just hear a little bit about each of you. Such things as your early life, careers, family, whatever you think would be of interest.
All right, I was born in Joliet, Illinois, to a rather large family, Catholic family. I have 7 siblings, and I was quite active around our house. I was one of the older ones, so often had a lot of responsibility towards my younger sisters and brothers.
Yeah, older ones do.
Yes, and it was pretty much a joyful family, a very outspoken, emotional Italian family.
That explains it.
Yes, and so home life was very lively. So my mother was a very devout Catholic. She just passed away this spring, and she made religion in our home a marvelous thing. So
that's wonderful.
It was a special, special thing in my life, and so I credit her for any type of spirituality and devotion that I may have as an adult. So, but a strange thing happened when, about the time I was graduating from high school, to Catholics worldwide, and that was the Vatican's Second Council, which just changed everything. And when everything was changed for the first time in my life, I began to question, well, what is it exactly I do believe? Was it right the way it was before? Is it right now? And what do I believe? So that started me on a search. And it also started me on a path of kind of waywardness, and until I was my mid-20s and found the Baha'i faith.
All right. Bob?
Well, I've been thinking about writing a book. So
All right.
How much time do we have again? But anyway, I grew up actually about a mile away from the WFT studio, where the show is being generated from. Champaign is my home, and I have lived out of the community maybe 4 years total of my life, 5 years at the most. So different from my wife, my family was more subdued. My mom was Methodist, my dad was Catholic, which was a big deal about 60 years ago, 70 years ago. And now it's nothing. I mean, people wouldn't bat an eye, hardly. So my parents, as I said, were kind of products of World War II and the Depression. And so instead of being a very lively home, my mother had a lot of illness after I was born. So there were 2 kids, and then about a 10-year gap and 2 more kids. And so it led for many varied experiences. I had some foster parents for a while when my mom was very ill, who were very dear to me. We had an Amish housekeeper once for about 6 months, 5-6 days a week. We had people living in our home at least half of my childhood. So that allows me to kind of feel, one, that privacy is good, but it's also not mandatory. So anyway, went to Holy Cross for my education, and they had what's called a catechism, a book, and they'd teach the young children, we're all God's children. There's only one God, and they'd have different shades of children there, all happily interacting. And I think as I grew older, I didn't see that so much. I didn't feel it maybe in practice. Like many youth, I sort of started to drift away from my roots, but those early teachings were very important to me, and I see them in the Baha'i faith.
Yes.
If there's only one religion, because there's only one God. One mankind, one religion, one God. It all made sense to me as I grew older. And so the Baha'i faith for me became an answer to a search. I cared very much about the political scene and studied political science for a while, studied psychology for a while, like a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a lot of us looking for answers. I did get to participate in some peaceful demonstration to try to get the number of African Americans up at EIU, which was even lower than the U of I, which was very low,
Right.
And so those were times of changes. And we like to give credit to Baha'u'llah, who revealed in the mid-1800s the equality of men and women, the equality of the races,
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of things aren't new to Baha'is, and I'm so happy now to see even though I'm a product of my environment, so many interracial couples of my age, let alone younger, and doesn't even worry about that kind of thing anymore. And we give credit to Baha'u'llah, who came in the 1800s. We feel religion is renewed about every 1,000 years, and so Jesus, Muhammad, Baha'u'llah, each one had a social teaching along with renewing the same spiritual truths.
Right.
And so I was at Eastern Illinois University. I didn't graduate, but I did. I gained a lot of experience, had too many interests, I guess. But anyway, ended up graduating from Parkland. But yeah, I found out about the Baha'i faith. There was a sociology teacher who introduced the faith in her introductory sociology. So she spent a couple days on world religions, and a good part of that, on the Baha'i faith. And I got to sit on that. Dr. Frida Studi was her name. And she, as a professor, would introduce that to everyone, but she didn't have meetings in her home or anything. So we went to the next town over, Mattoon, and found a couple. Let's see, one or both, I think, were widower, and had remarried, and she could quote the Bible and tie the Baha'i faith in.
Yes.
Very well, like all of the prophecies, of return and, the renewal of religion. And he was a businessman. He had a furniture store in Mattoon, and he knew the social teachings and how important they were. He was a Rotarian. It's just the Baha'i faith brings a beautiful balance of accepting all of the major world's religions as one truth, and that the social teachings are upgraded about every 1,000 years, and that Baha'u'llah, we feel, is the latest to do that. We mentioned a couple of the principles, and I just love the way that this couple, introduced me to the faith, both of them having their strengths. And then I ended up becoming detached from Eastern, coming back, and there was a very strong university group here on campus. And so we would go to Garita Busey's home about a half mile from campus, and about every Friday night or so there would be a fireside where they discuss the faith. So I actually became a Baha'i in Urbana, but
now, was this before you two met?
yes.
Oh, yes. So I grew up in Joliet, and that's where I became a Baha'i. I was on this path of no path and confusion and whatever.
As you said, a little wavered, yes.
Right. I never wavered from believing in God.
Yeah.
I just didn't know how Jesus fit in there. And then through some personal experiences, I figured out how Jesus was who he claimed to be, but I really couldn't go back to being Catholic. And I had studied a few Eastern religions, and I decided that everything seemed to be pretty good, but I was raised a Christian, so I should maybe try and stay with Christianity. And so I began attending non-denominational Christian churches. But I never could. I was not a good fit because
I know that feeling.
because I just was really troubled by what I was hearing as far as certain interpretations went. And my struggle was that the Bible, I was 100% sure, was a book of truth. So the Bible is a book of truth, but how could some of the way things were being interpreted, how could they be the truth? And it caused quite a bit of turmoil in me. And I remember one night I was at my home and I was reading the Bible, and the thought occurred to me, God talked to his people throughout the ages, and why has he been silent for so long?
Yes.
And it was right after that I would say the Baha'i faith found me. It found me, and all of a sudden I went from never in my life really feeling like I felt I was in sync with any group to feeling like this was my home. This
A
is
little bit of
where
an
I felt.
outsider.
The confusion was fading away. I had this feeling that I could turn back and look at my whole life and see how all of a sudden it just made so much sense because it was leading me to that specific point.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was big, very big. So I became a Baha'i, and it was wonderful. And I was about 24. And then before I was a better student than Bob. So school was kind of my world, but I was in and out of it because of all of my wandering around and confusion. But then when I became a Baha'i, education is highly valued.
Yes.
In the faith, and Baha'u'llah talks about its importance over and over again. And so finally I said, okay, well, I'm going to finally go to school. I'm going to finally finish my degree. And so I went to Southern Illinois University, and that was in the late 70s, and there were Baha'i activities that were happening district-wide. And Bob came down to some of those activities, and that's how we met.
Yeah, the Baha'i faith, it's not by no means mandatory to marry within the Baha'i faith, but, you have many things in common, and so it's natural that you would often meet someone,
Absolutely.
So when Bob and I met, we knew that we both wanted to find a spouse. We both wanted to marry. We both wanted to have a family, and we both wanted to raise children that would grow with the love of God in their hearts. So we knew that. The devil was
they did that.
They might have pulled that off, maybe.
The devil was in the details. So, and
Very
then
good.
8 years later, we had 4 daughters. So, and then it was pretty busy time for us. When I met Bob, he had just begun his career as a Champaign firefighter. And we were both agreed that we wanted to raise our children. We didn't want to necessarily send them to daycare or whatever, and especially in their very early life.
Yes.
So we were willing to make whatever monetary sacrifices, although Bob did have a very, very good job. We still needed to pinch pennies at that time, and make the sacrifices to have him have the burden of having to go to work and me have the burden of having to stay home all the time.
Yes. I guess that's something that I strongly believe in, that those children need us during those years. And like you say, it's the values you're teaching them are so much more important than having fancy clothes and swimming pools or whatever.
Right.
So, yeah.
So you raise them the best that you know how, and then when they are raised, you realize that probably a lot of what you did was you would do differently if you knew what you knew now. But none of our children have ended up in prison or are drug addicts.
That's what I think about when I view my children. You know, it's like, wow, they turned out so well.
In fact,
we're so young when we're doing this and inexperienced.
Yes,
know.
I'm proud to say that all of them are tax-paying adults.
With my career, I was actually gone 24 hours every third day. I worked for the Champaign Fire Department starting in 1978, and have since retired from there. But I give Karen a lot of credit. She carried the ball. And there are a lot of singles moms out there that do a wonderful job, and single dads too, or people who, you know, don't have the traditional couple at home every night. But, you know, she even homeschooled the girls part of 2 years for the oldest, one for the next. And just because we thought that was best for them at the time, and
yes.
You know, she had a teaching degree, and but just the idea that, you know, she took care of everything that needed to be taken care of those 24 hours, and then if overtime came along or whatever, you know, the mom is in the Baha'i faith. We know that the mother is the first teacher of the child, and that's a very important role. Baha'u'llah said that if there was only enough resources to educate, say, one of two children, one a boy and one a girl, it's most important to educate the girl because she's the first teacher of the child of the next generation. And so that's what happened. And we were blessed that we didn't have to struggle really financially because we had a steady income. When I worked construction before the fire department, you know, there's a season of work and a slow season. But the career I picked, I do want to talk about that at some point. And Karen, she made a lot of sacrifices. You know, it's called the fire service. You know, we're serving the greater public, but sometimes your family suffers for you being there for, you know, everybody else. If you decide, okay, I got to take this overtime when there was a family.
So in a sense, the family is serving the community.
It is, and
very much so, and especially for I have just found out because Bob is retired from the Champaign Fire Department, but is now a volunteer on the Corn Belt Fire Department in Mahomet. And I have to say that the families of those volunteer firefighters really sacrifice a lot. I basically knew when Bob was going to be coming or going. It was a very different feeling from right now, getting a call in the middle of the night, getting a call in the middle of dinner, getting a call in the middle of a meeting, a middle of a family event.
This is as bad as being a doctor.
Right, and worse probably. And the volunteer, you know, needs to respond when he's able to that call. And I'm thanking God that that wasn't the situation when our family was growing up. So it would be very difficult. But Bob would be gone at the fire department, but I have to say that Baha'u'llah's principle of the equality of men and women was something that we tried to put into place, and we struggled with because it's always evolving. But Bob would come home from work and he would just jump in with both feet in caring for the kids, being with the kids, playing with the kids, taking the kids places. So they had, for that time, a very special father that a lot of my other friends, you know, were not reporting to me that their spouses were like. And that was very important for him and very important for me. But still, I remember when our first child was taken for her first immunization, and the nurse gave her the shot and she started to cry, and I was going to pick her up, but he picked her up and started patting her, and I stood there thinking, but that's my baby. And so there was that type of thing. And then I remember him standing doing dishes one day and saying, I feel so emasculated. So, I mean, those were the types of emotional issues
Yes.
that we and couples today are still working out.
Yes.
So
Well-
we raised our children in Muhammad. Bob moved there before we met, and then when I married him, I moved there. And there was a small community in Muhammad, and the Muhammad community to this day remains small. But we tried to bring our children into Champaign-Urbana. We traveled around to different places to be with different Baha'i families. We had one family, family friends who had children the same age as most of our children, and they lived in Bloomington. So we were going over to Bloomington quite often, and they would come to our house. And I remember one day where somebody asked one of our children, if you could live anywhere in the whole world, where would you live? And it was a resounding Bloomington. Oh my gosh, we got to get them out and about a little bit more. But it was just this feeling of love between the children, and
Yes.
this shared hope for who they were becoming and who their parents were. And the other thing is, when our children were growing up and going to school in Muhammad, Illinois, the school population was 99.99% Caucasian. And there were no African Americans in the school system, period. There was a token Asian here or there. So this idea of all people being your sisters and brothers, and this idea of racial justice, and they got that by participating in the Baha'i community, so that when they hit junior high and high school and they were confronted by racism, they recognized it immediately, and they recognized it as the things that were being said as lies, and they called people on it. And then by that time, there were a few more people of other races and cultures that were coming to Muhammad, and the younger ones were very adamant about being their friends and protecting them from any type of racial injustice or slurs or any of that. So anyhow, proud of them.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yes.
Muhammad is actually much more diverse now. You know, it reflects the population of the county much more than it did 20
That's
years,
the way
24
my
years
hometown
ago.
was also. It was primarily Caucasian. My eyes were open more when I got into areas where, hey, there are all these other people besides us.
I will say one thing about travel, and Karen mentioned opening the eyes, you know, beyond Champaign-Urbana maybe, and Muhammad, of course. We took our kids on a Baha'i pilgrimage. We happened to have a radius of buildings on Mount Carmel. It's very beautiful in Haifa, Israel. But here again, we took our daughter at age 10, which was like the youngest you could bring someone. And now our kids, they love every culture, I think. And one daughter's a human geographer. One daughter helped bring interns into the United States from varied parts of the world. Our third daughter is a dietitian in Georgetown, and just, you know, is very much in love with the world. And our youngest in Chicago, you know, several of our kids have best friends from different cultural
Yes.
neighborhoods of the world, and have dated and so forth. And it's just natural for them to love the world. And 3 or
Really?
4 or 5 times a year, one of them will be overseas somewhere, it seems like.
World citizens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this idea of through the generations propelling a civilization forward. And I can remember when I was a new Baha'i, there was a big youth conference, national youth conference here in Champaign. I was up in Joliet, and so the youth said, "Oh, Karen, do you want to go down to Champaign? There's this big youth conference." And I said, "Well, why would I ever want to go to Champaign, Illinois?" Because everything I needed, all the people I loved, everybody was just right there in Joliet. My whole family, all my friends.
Sure.
You know. So now I would have to say our second daughter is in Ecuador now, visiting friends that she met when they were going to school. Her friends were going to school in Stanford, which is where she lives in California, and our two other daughters live in Maryland, and our fourth daughter lives in Chicago, and they have been many different places in the world, and they, as many youth do today, see it very, very differently than we were when we were growing up. So.
Isn't it amazing? My sister and I have talked about this at times. For us growing up back in the 40s, the idea of going someplace foreign, you just read about that in books. Mm-hmm. That was not something you even dreamed about doing. And yet our grandchildren are world travelers. And it's just amazing to us, you know. It's just hard to believe.
We've been talking a lot about the outside world, and I would like to talk about something that was important to me since I became a Baha'i. And that is the inner life of an individual.
Yes.
And from the time of the Bab, this idea of refinement has been a part of the faith, where you refine yourself on a spiritual level, and that refinement is carried into the outer world. So not only are you refining your heart and your spirit, but you are physically try to be cleaner, physically try to, you know, keep things more in order, physically try to carry that refined spirit and heart into your human relationships. And so it's always been very important to me because of that to try and be the same person I am privately to myself as I am with the people around me. So I don't know, maybe Bob feels differently, but I think basically when I interact with most people, they get basically what I am in my interactions with them. And not to say that they're perfect, but hopefully keep on refining on the inside and carry that to the outside. And Baha'u'llah is very specific in saying that this is really how the world is going to change. The individual changes themselves and begin to refine themselves, and then they marry, and they carry this refinement into their marriage and then into the family, and then the family carries that into the outer world. And that's how we're going to make this civilization that advances. So
I'm so glad you've made that point, because I think it's one that tends to get missed.
Right. Because Baha'u'llah talks about a new race of men, and you know, that's what I think that he means. That it's, you know, it's one thing to have a lot of political solutions and ideas that come from new laws and whatever, but you can have all the great laws on paper you want. If people read them and scoff and go, "Well, I'm not going to live up to that ideal," then it doesn't do you any good. But if you have people who are already living those ideals, then it all works. You know, that the laws, then a new good law will be enforced by good law-abiding people. But it doesn't really work the other way around.
Right. And then I would like to say, even when we were growing up, it seemed like there was a very discernible line between what was good and what was bad, and then all of a sudden things became very gray. You know? So maybe that's not so bad, and maybe that's not so good. The Bab taught a concept, the middle way, where no one way is the best way, but maybe over on one end of the spectrum they have certain truths, and on the other end of the spectrum they have certain truths, and you're supposed to take the truth from both sides and bring them to the middle to make this middle way. And so that's a very exciting concept to me also, to be able to do that. So,
Bob?
Well, earlier today I came up with the faith-based life, and so I made an acronym out of faith on topics that we talked about. So the word family for F, 2 became 6 in our case. Attitude for the A. Life has many hills and valleys. I had mentioned the example of prescription and street drugs have exceeded the number of deaths over car accidents, which is kind of stunning, but it's true. A lot of people don't have hope, in the current world that they can get through without
For sure.
some help. And sometimes it backfires. So I for inner strength, and that comes through the meditation that Karen mentioned and calling herself to account each day. T for time. No one knows how much we have, but it's kind of like money. We have to budget it and use it wisely. And the best way to spend your time is serving family and mankind versus, self-serving.
Mm-hmm.
And H, there is hope. There is hope when you have a religion as timely as the Baha'i faith. We feel it has many answers for today and into the future generations.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I'd like to just talk a minute about that timeliness, because we have so far talked about how we met, how we became Baha'is, how we raised our family, and it seems like we were doing all the time what we felt like we were being called to do. And the Baha'is have a wonderful guiding body at the international level that is at the center of the Baha'i world, and they know how things are going worldwide, and so they're in a wonderful position to say, this is what's happening and this is what I think we should be doing at this time. And so about 15 years ago, things started changing really dramatically in the Baha'i faith when the Universal House of Justice said, okay, so now we've spent years, we're making our Baha'i families, we're strengthening our Baha'i communities, but we are too inward focused, and the time has come where we need to look at the world around us, become more active in the world around us, seek out more like-minded people, work with them, and basically stretch ourselves.
Right.
And one thing that they have told us over and over and over again, which I think is just one of the most releasing and beautiful things ever, is that all of us individuals in this world are constantly on this learning curve, that there is nobody that has ever arrived but the manifestations, but there's nobody else of us that have arrived at perfect or we know it all. And that was another thing that was happening when we were growing up. There was still this idea that you could learn everything there was about something, and that's kind of been blown into shatters now in the modern day, because there's just so much information. And so younger people realize that you want to learn as much as you can, but nobody will ever know the whole story about almost anything, because things are growing all the time, and so are people. And so people are growing all the time, and it isn't expected that everyone will be in the same spot as everyone else.
True.
And that doesn't mean that they're behind or they're better or they know more or they're good or they're bad. It's just the way it is. And so it stretches us to be more inclusive. It stretches us to be more accepting, and it stretches us to be more involved in the world around us. So,
that kind of reminded me, you talked about this idea of stretching, and it's like so often we hear the words, studies say that, studies have proved that, and as soon as that gets out of their mouth, it isn't long before it's, whoops, studies say that.
Right.
A new study.
Right. And of course, for people who study science, as a discipline, that kind of change is par for the course. But for the rest of the citizens, this idea of settled knowledge is a hard one to break. You know, the fact that knowledge is growing all the time is very difficult for a lot of people.
Well, and to what you were saying about personal growth, we never reach that point of perfection. But you know, once in a while there'll be a spot in our life when we might feel like, as we get older, you know, it's like, okay, what is there now? It's like, okay, I think I've gone as far as I can go. Well, watch out.
So true.
Because when you reach
So
that point
true.
of,
Then-
Boy, you're going to find out.
you're going to find out what you don't know.
That's for sure.
I know I had mentioned earlier that we're sending this out from WFT. We're actually at the Urbana Baha'i Center right now recording it, and we're in a library that's full of books. And there's so much that can be learned about the Baha'i faith if anyone ever wants to come check out a book. Or Marilyn will tell you, I'm sure, about Sunday devotions and things like that.
Right. So there was one other thing I was going to mention when you were talking about being at home with the children. In today's world, a lot of people will say, "Oh, she's just a stay-at-home mother," and that just bothers me so. Baha'u'llah has told us, Abdul Baha has told us, that being at home with your children is work. It is acceptable as work. And you stop to think about it. What is more important in the world than the job of being the mother and teaching those children? You know, that is not to be scoffed at. That is not second rate at all. It is right up at the top there.
Let me just say, though, my career as a firefighter, you know, at times is dangerous, but
Oh, very much.
but Karen had an even more dangerous job at times.
Not as a single mother.
She taught driver's training for a while, part-time.
Oh, really?
And,
Okay.
She worked about, 3 years at the Regional Board of Education full-time. And she also worked for a local dentist in Mahomet for about 5 years. So after the kids grew up, you know, she did work. So she's...
Well, that's the thing. There is plenty of time for young women to be that mother and then go out and find whatever it is they have on their mind that they really want to do. It's not like back in the days when mothers were old at 40.
Right.
Mothers are just starting to get into the world and have all the time in the world to do it.
Well, thanks, Karen. Thanks, Bob. We're getting toward the end of the hour here, but I wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about the fact that this is the WEFT Heartbeat Collective, and the purpose of this program is to showcase work that's being carried out in the not-for-profit sector here in town. And, you know, so this show is supposed to be working in the not-for-profit sector, and, you know, mainly we've been talking about family.
Actually, Sean and Marilyn, family is the ultimate not-for-profit.
That's right.
Right.
Well, I would just like to say that Abdul Baha, one of the central figures of the Baha'i faith, has told us that the basic unit of society is the family. So family relationships, how brothers treat each other, parents and children relate to each other, is brought into the greater society by those individuals. So having strong, vibrant, faithful families is so important, because from the very, very most basic level ingrains things into individuals that they are going to carry into all of their outside activities, into their workplaces, into their friendships, into their families when they continue to have them. Is going to be carried out into the world, and that is going to be the basic unit that will change the whole world.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. You guys are great.
So before we close, let's take a look at what's going to be taking place at the Baha'i Center in Urbana over the next few weeks.
Each Sunday morning at 11 a.m., there is a devotional program of prayers, readings, and an informal discussion on a wide possible variety of subjects. Every second Sunday of the month at 3 p.m., there will be a potluck supper, an uplifting, all-inclusive worship program with live music and singing, followed by an informational activity for spiritual and practical well-being. On the fourth Sunday of each month, the weekly devotional program will be followed by a potluck lunch at noon and game day, an afternoon of family-friendly fun and games for all ages. Also, on the first Friday of each month at 7:30 p.m., there is an event called the First Friday Fireside. The local Baha'i community invites all who are interested to attend these informal monthly talks, which will cover various aspects of the Baha'i faith, followed by a Q&A session. Additional information about Baha'i activities in the Champaign-Urbana area can be found on the local Baha'i website, cubahai.org. That's cu-bahai.org. Click Goings On to see the local calendar. The Baha'i Center is located at 807 East Green Street in Urbana, a few blocks east of Lincoln Square. It is a stop on the Red Bus Line, and it is wheelchair accessible.
Well, my goodness. We are so happy that you have been with us today, Bob and Karen, to inspire our faith journeys. Thank you, both of you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
And we're going to be doing some reading of Baha'i writings and hope that you will join us in doing that.
Of course.
Sure. Lift up your hearts above the present and look with eyes of faith into the future. Today the seed is sown, the grain falls upon the earth, but behold, the day will come when it shall rise a glorious tree, and the branches thereof shall be laden with fruit. Abdul-Baha.
It is indeed a good and praiseworthy thing to progress materially, but in so doing, let us not neglect the more important spiritual progress and close our eyes to the divine light shining in our midst. Abdul-Baha.
May you become as the waves of one sea, stars of the same heaven, fruits adorning the same tree, roses of one garden, in order that through you the oneness of humanity may establish its temple in the world of mankind. For you are the ones who are called to uplift the cause of unity among the nations of the earth. Abdul-Baha.
To find out more about Baha'i events taking place in Champaign-Urbana, or if you'd like to listen to previous New Lamp programs, you can go online to www.cu-bahai.org. Or if you would like to learn more about the Baha'i national and international community, go to www.bahai.us. Thank you again for joining us today. I hope you'll join us again next month. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening to this week's Weekend Heartbeat on WEFT Champaign 90.1 FM, Community Radio, Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, streaming live at www.weft.org.